So I believe this is where we're due to start up again concerning justification. I don't hear you, Pat.
I believe that 4 weeks ago, we had worked on question 5 in justification.
Would anyone mind if we go through that one again?
No, that's fine.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't mind reading. I'll get us started. How is this justification wrought? Answer: by faith in the virtue which floweth from Christ. Okay. By faith in the virtue which floweth from Christ, God letting in of the nature of his Son into the heart, and begetting therein somewhat of his own likeness, in which he draweth, and which he giveth to believe in. This faith is imputed by God for righteousness in every heart wherever it is found. And where this faith in the living virtue is found, there God blotteth out the iniquities for his name's sake. Yea, and remission is felt in that which is made living. And there is one near, who hath power to bind or loose in the conscience according to the nature of the dispensation, and who doth bind or loose in every dispensation as he findeth cause. But all loosing of sins is for Christ's sake, and through his blood, though every one in every dispensation is not able distinctly so to read it. Yea, under the law, the remission was by this sacrifice, though many of the Jews could not read the type. The promise is to the seed of the kingdom, and to man in the seed, and there it reacheth him whenever it findeth him. For in all his gatherings into, and being found in, that he is blessed. Perhaps I just need help in reading this, but most of the time when I read Penington, I feel like he's speaking from his experience. And this one sounds a bit like a catechism, although not the ending. The ending seems real, and I think the beginning seems real, but doesn't feel as deeply felt to me as most of his writings. But I may just miss something here.
I had made a note that in the margins of the book, Romans 3:21 through 26. And so I looked at that passage, and in reading it, I feel like it is talking about the same thing that Penington is talking about, and even using some of the same vocabulary. But what is unusual is that Paul, especially in Romans, can be difficult to understand, but I find that he's easier to understand than Penington is in this passage. So maybe it would help to hear the Romans passage to get, I think, a clearer idea of what Penington is saying. I'll read it in the New English Bible because it's clearer than in the King James. The meaning is clearer. This is Romans 3:21 through 26. But now, quite independently of law, God's justice has been brought to light. The law and the prophets both bear witness to it. It is God's way of righting wrong, effective through faith in Christ for all who have such faith, all, without distinction. For all alike have sinned and are deprived of the divine splendor, and all are justified by God's free grace alone, through his act of liberation in the person of Christ Jesus. For God designed him to be the means of expiating sin by his sacrificial death, effective through faith. God meant by this to demonstrate his justice, because in his forbearance he had overlooked the sins of the past, to demonstrate his justice now in the present, showing that he is himself just and also justifies any man who puts his faith in Jesus. Well, I'd say that this this passage in Penington is emphasizing the inward nature of justification, which might have been in contradiction, maybe that's too strong of a word, to the other Christians, so-called, of his time, which put the justification of man being effected through Christ's work on the cross. And Penington is situating that justification in the inward knowledge of the virtue which comes from Christ, which, as the second sentence says there, God has let the nature of his Son into the heart and begets therein somewhat of his own likeness, in which he draweth and which he giveth to believe in. So this is occurring in the heart through the God's giving the nature of Christ into the person, letting Christ within be known. Goes on, where this faith in the living virtue is found, meaning when the virtue is in the heart and where it's recognized and found, that's where God blots out the iniquities, which is the meaning of justification. And the remission is felt in that which is made living. So again, there's that inward sense of life. It's all inwardly sensed rather than outwardly performed by Jesus on the cross. I'm sorry, go ahead, Madeline.
I was just going to say it's that clause to which I feel most connected, is that there is a feeling when I mean, I don't know that God is blotting out iniquities, but I can attest to a feeling of remission or forgiveness as I feel more faithful, more attentive to Christ and Christ's messages, then I do have a sense of things being blotted out and not having to live in that any longer. I've been made more alive, and so I don't have to think about those things that are dead.
When he was reading the passages about whatever one binds on earth or looses. I've got one of them in front of me in Matthew 16, and I will give thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And a question arose about the intersection of the personal experience of the life being justified in that life of which both of you were speaking, and the community. And I have a lot of experience with use and abuse of this passage, and I'm trying to intersect it with the Penington passage. It's just opening questions.
What that recalls for me is the passage in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And it is showing a reciprocality there, that if we are forgiving, if we have that spirit where we forgive, then we also have, ipso facto, have that same spirit which has justified us or removed our trespasses. There's an automatic, if the Spirit is there, one will be forgiving and one will also be forgiven, because that Spirit accomplishes both of those things. But to the fleshly minded, it sounds like a cause and effect situation. Like, you forgive person A over there, and God will then forgive you. But the phrase works differently for the fleshly minded than it does for the spiritually minded. I think for the spiritually minded, it's simply a statement that when the Spirit is present, one can be forgiving and one is forgiven, both simultaneously. That sense of life and spirit is very convincing that one's sins have been forgiven. And neither can one feel resentment or anger or hatred towards anyone when that spirit is present.
I myself have experienced a remarkable lightening or liberation from the spirit of unforgiveness in, the last decade or two. But I recently identified a stratum of my own character that seems to have been set in my early childhood, where I seem incurably bad to myself, and I'm sure that I'm going to have a terrible punishment visited on me, in the form of a beating from my father, or being shouted at by my father, who terrified me. And so at some point in my childhood, I started doing little naughty crimes around the house, knowing that they'd be found out and that I would then be punished for them. But this would protect me against being surprised by being punished for something that I hadn't anticipated. But at the bottom of it seemed to be a belief that had been inculcated into me that I was just incurably bad. And today, even today, it seems to manifest as a kind of clumsiness where I make loud noises. I drop my cane on the floor, jarring people. The other, handle a bag of raw oatmeal flakes clumsily and hurriedly in this tiny van that Autumn and I are traveling in. And I was forced to question myself, why did I do that? It seemed like one of those things that Sigmund Freud called parapraxis, where an intended action comes out wrong. And that's when I had the flash of insight into this unhealed stratum of my character that always seems to be trying not to be surprised by unexpected punishment, but doing something annoying or obnoxious that will win me the punishment, but one that is less than the terrible one I might be surprised by. I don't know if I've expressed that clearly, but it sent me into prayer for the Lord to heal me of that quirk of character that is clumsy and annoying, in spite of my outward will not to be clumsy and annoying. And I'm still in prayer about I want to be healed. Jesus Christ can and will heal incurably bad, as I was led to believe as a small child. And I may have unpleasant experiences, but they're not punishments for my incurable badness, but just part of what the Lord sees fit to subject me to grow me in my faith and my spiritual maturity. And they are all for the good, all things working together for good to those who love God. I feel like, well, here's a new way in which my intellectual belief that I am justified in the sight of God has to sink deeper roots into my whole personality, if I can put it that way. That Christ needs to make my heart fully alive so that I can receive the Lord's justification and live into it. I'm just sharing that sense of what's happening to me. I wish I could have expressed it more briefly.
That's pretty complicated. I think it, the way you described it, it sounds like you were trying to maintain some kind of control over the situation in which you had no control. That if you identified, I did this, and so therefore I was punished, you were in control of whether you were being punished or not. Whereas if you were just punished without any sense of what you did wrong or what you did unintentionally, then you were out of control. It was your father who had the control. And I wonder if the same kind of dynamic happens spiritually, where people intentionally sin because they know then why they are being refused entry into the kingdom. They're in control of their being kept out of the kingdom. But if they do everything within their power to do what is right, recognize what is sinful and turn away from it, then it's not their control anymore. It's totally the Father's control. And that can feel like the reality. Mortality, we aren't in control. It can be facing the truth.
That's terrifying because it tempts us to think reality and that I, the actor, the doer, am really powerless to do any act that has a predictable effect because it may blow up in my face.
Well, that's the cross.
Yes.
But we do have the power to choose what is right. And if we have faith in life, not in God, but have faith in life, in our capacity to apprehend reality, then then we believe that there's order in the universe, and we trust that, and that makes us willing to face the truth about ourselves, no matter where it leads. And that's very painful. And that's the cross. But it's necessary. And there are enough people in our tradition that tells you that's the way through this, and that in the end, it's to your benefit to see yourself and to love truth and to seek righteousness and hunger and thirst after it. That in the end, it is the way to the kingdom. Even through it, though it's through the black hole of the cross. You know, everybody has to do that if they want to know what it is to fully be alive. It's real.
Is there anything you'd like to add, David, before we move on to the next question?
No, thank you, Madeline. I've been just listening, and I've been through some of this myself. So,
Okay, I will take us on to 6. Would someone like to read?
I'd be willing to. Question 6. Then may a man be justified who never heard outwardly of Christ? Answer. If he feel the seed of life be overcome by its nature, give up to its law, as it is made manifest in his heart, abhor the nature and law of sin and death, and thus in soul cleave unto the Lord, and follow him as he pleaseth to lead. The spirit and life of the Lord cannot but herein justify him. And the grace and mercy of the Lord cannot withhold, giving him out his pardon for his sins past, and also pass by his future frailties, although he distinctly know not how to sue out and plead it. The redemption and pardon of sin is through the unlimited grace of God, which is not restrained to the outward knowledge of the creature, but issueth forth according to the capacity that God creates anywhere to receive it. Life, mercy, grace, pardon, etc., issue forth from God into the vessels of every kind, under every dispensation that he prepareth for them. Inward sense of dispensations, and not the outward skill or knowledge, but thrusts that by in every dispensation, except as his inward life and virtue is found in it.
I'm just grateful hearing this, that the early Quakers had this understanding and were fearless in declaring it. And that presumably we Quakers continue to declare it in the face of those who would really limit God's action to the chosen few. And yeah, it's heart expanding rather than heart contracting.
This is one of the reasons I came back to Friends, is the light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. Make distinction by denomination of faith, but by the presence and acknowledging and following the light's leading.
I think I recognize this in a letter to the Romans in chapter 2. That people who are like the Gentiles who actually follow. It says, the Gentiles do not have the law, but by nature do the things in the law. Who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness. Between themselves, their thoughts accusing or else excusing them. So people who follow the light in their conscience and obey it can be justified.
The other thing that's striking me is this near the end, I guess third line from the bottom, under every dispensation that he prepareth for them. It just sounds like there's a personal plan, a personal set of type of forgiveness that's, I don't know, what more to say, that this is very personal. It's very individualized, the way God is working in us.
I agree. It's very individualized, but it also has a common quality across all humanity. I remember reading in the journal, I believe, Fox's journal, that he had asked a Native American, I believe, if there was something that chastised him inwardly when he had told a lie or done something wrong. And the reply was yes. And that, I think, is across humanity, that awareness of sin is in each person. And it's a guide. That's the first indication that there is something better than what we have initially in our first birth. And our responsibility is, when that's recognized, when we become aware of that, to turn from it. If we don't turn from it, if we just stifle that sense, inward sense, what happens is we what the early Friends called our conscience becomes seared or unfeeling, so that we don't even notice the error, and that ruins the possibility of moving towards the second birth. So we have to allow in those painful feelings of having committed something wrong in order to be sensitive to that, to our limitations and our mortality. We have to be aware and accepting that truth. And that's what prepares us to receive Christ. That's what prepares us for the resurrection, to life. So it's in every nation and every time that the inward life is arranged in such a way that we can move towards being prepared to receive grace. And ironically, that it's been that the Christianity's been perverted to the point where people are told that they must believe some resurrection of Christ as the salvific event, and it's before they're ready to understand the inward significance of that. And just believing the outward story and believing that that's salvific actually hampers people from the true justification and salvation. And the Friends knew that.
I feel the same way, Patricia. I think so many of the Christian rituals and beliefs that can be saved by not baptism, the outward baptism actually displaces the role of Christ in the inward baptism from people's minds and hearts. They don't even think about it because they're too focused on the outward one. And I think Paul goes on in the second chapter of Romans to emphasize the inward stuff, in a quote that's in several places used by Fox. For he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh. But he is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, not in the letter. That's Romans 2, 28 and 29.
The early friends use that, a reference to that passage a lot, frequently.
Mm. Mm.
I'm conscious of the time. Is there anything else to be said about this before we close?
I just want to express how marvelous it is, how glorious God's government seems to me, because I sense that so many people are stuck in their habitual besetting sins because they despair of getting washed clean of them and really being justified. Or they think, oh, that will be terrible because I'll never be able to live up to that. My hungers, my greeds, my bad habits, my lusts will always, my anger will spoil it if God extends it to me. And that's makes so many people so unhappy and keeps them in bondage.
Well, that's a good note. I will stop the recording here in a moment.
Well, thank you, friends. I need to get on with some things for the day. We've got somebody with us here that we're taking somewhere this morning.
So
I might
glad
actually send around to you a copy of our little article, which was published in actually the Australian Quaker thing, as I'm attempting to open people's minds to some things they don't normally think about. On the phrase, they are a law unto themselves, which is from Romans 2.
that would be great.
Most people have no idea what this actually means. I'll send it around to you. Anyway.
Good, thank you.
In 2 weeks.